He was raised on rock and roll and Sinatra. He loves whiskey and dirty martinis. In college, he started a window washing business with a friend called Crystal Clear. After reviewing their subpar work, the first client told them in not so subtle terms that it was crystal clear they had no business in this business. This is Rock on the Rocks with E.T.
Someone I just met recently, recent years, legendary rock photographer Henry Diltz. They're both going to be on. And right now I have producer Chris on, so I'm excited to say hey to you.
Hey, happy to be here, man.
Yeah, man, it's such a weird, life kind of thing. I mean, I guess there's no coincidences, right? So I guess 4 years ago, it was the 2016 election, and I was going to vote. And when you vote in person, you sign your street name. At least in LA, you sign your find your street name, and they make sure it's you and you vote. And there was two women that were volunteering to help out at that part of the process. And they're older and they were volunteering and they've been on their feet all day. And one of the women says to me, "Did you bring any Jack Daniels with you?" I'm like, "What do you mean?" And I guess I was wearing a hat. And I'm like, "No, I didn't." I said, "Do you drink Jack Daniels?" And she said that she loves Jack Honey, which I don't know, for some reason I found that very humorous. And they were really sweet and signed me in, and I went and voted it. And I said goodbye. And I was walking out. There's this older hippie looking guy at saying goodbye to people on the way out and making sure they didn't forget anything. And he's like, "Oh, Jack Daniels. I used to drink a lot of that back in my day." I started talking, really cool guy. So I get in my car and I'm driving home and I'm like, you know what? I'm 3 blocks away from the voting place and they're on their feet all day. So I went home and I got some hats and some stuff and went back and gave them out. And, they're all really happy. But the guy was like, "Man, that was so nice. You have to do that. Super, super cool." And we just started bullshitting and we're talking about music. And he was in the music business. He was on the production of actual physical album side of it. And, we just had tons of stuff in common. So we said, we should get together when you're not working and get coffee or something and bullshit. He's like, "Yeah." So we exchanged numbers and we played phone tag for, I want to say 2 years. Cause pre-COVID, I travel all the time for work. So every time he was free, I was out of the city. And every time I was free, he was with his kids. I think they live a little further out. And finally we get together and he says, "Hey, I never forgot when you went back and brought us all the hats and shirts and stuff." And he slid this like large manila envelope across the table. And he's like, "This is one of my closest friends in the world. And I had him sign this for you. I think you're going to like it." And I unwrap it or take it out of the envelope. And it's Henry Diltz's photograph of Keith Richards holding a Jack bottle. And I was like, this, first of all, I can't believe this is your buddy, but also I can't believe you just got me this signed photograph. And, the guy's name is Howard and we've become really good friends. And then one day he called me and he's like, "Hey, Henry's in town. Do you want to go say hi? He wants to meet you." And I said, "Sure." So we go to his house and I think he has 2 houses. The one near me in North Hollywood, it's where all his archives are. So everywhere you look is the Who at Leeds or something, some crazy, epic, legendary concert that he photographed. So we're out and back talking and it just comes up. I used to work, behind the bar for years and years. And he's like, "Where'd you work?" I was like, "Oh, I worked in right by West Hollywood area." He's like, "Yeah, man." He's like, "There's a restaurant there that uses my photo as a menu." I'm like, "Which photo?" He's like, "The Keith Richards one." I'm like, "Do you know what restaurant?" He's like, "No." I'm like, "Someone just took your photo and put their menu on it?" He's like, "Yeah, no, it's cool, man." He's like, "I just never saw it. I just heard about it." And as he's saying it, it's where I worked. And I took the photo and we printed the menu on his photo. And I just realized that I did it. I'm like, "Oh my God, that was me." So we took him to dinner there a couple weeks later and he loved it and thought it was cool. It's on our happy hour menu and it's a faded version of the photo with the menu printed over it. And, should have got permission. Luckily, he was really cool with it and loved it. But so that's how I met Henry Diltz.
You're the only person on the planet that could have that story.
It honestly, he really is, we'll meet him in a second and he's the sweetest guy. and he's just full of life and full of love. And I'll never forget, me, Howard, and Henry went out one night, and we went to dinner. And after dinner, I think Henry's assistant was with us, and she was starting to date this guy, and he ran a jazz club under a bridge in downtown LA. So we go down there. It's like 11 when we got there, and cool spot, place was packed. And people start finding out that Henry's the guy that shot Woodstock. Henry's the guy that shot this. And they're all band guys because they're playing at this venue. So they all want to meet him, and hopefully he'll take their picture. And now all of a sudden it's 3 a.m. And Howard is like, man, this always happens. He's like, I got to get home. This is getting crazy. So we finally get Henry out of there, and Howard doesn't drink. So he's driving us back to where we live. We all live pretty close to each other. And I'm, talking to Henry. I'm like, hey, man, that was great. We got to do it again sometime. We got to go out to dinner. He's like, yeah, man. Yeah. He goes, or we could flip the car around, go down to LAX, get on a plane and go to Tahiti for a week. He was dead serious. Dead serious. Like if we would have done it. And
your upcoming guest it suggested that at 3 a.m.
Yeah. And I think at the time he was 80, and he was dead serious. And I just kind of thought about like that phone call to my wife in the morning, like, hey, honey, crazy story, but I'm in Tahiti right now. But Howard kind of changed focus, and we went home. And unfortunately, I don't have the story of a week in Tahiti with Henry Diltz, but I do at least have the friendship of what I consider a great guy.
The friendship's still young, my friend. You could still have
it. No, it's only been a couple of years, and he's just a breath of fresh air every time I see him or talk to him. Really good guy.
Let's check it out.
Good stuff. All right, welcome to the show, Yael. Thanks for being here.
How's it going?
Pretty good. So Yael is one of my faves. We met in LA through, I guess, just being bartenders in LA together. And I'm not just a fan of Yael's. I feel like everyone I meet is a fan of Yael. So I'm excited to have you on the show.
Dude, I'm stoked to be here.
Yay. So, one thing I know you're a fan of music because one of the venues you've worked in does a lot of music. So I'm assuming you wouldn't work there if you weren't a fan. One thing that was cool there, you guys used to do a night called I Wrote That Shit. And it was like, you remember? So it was artists who might have wrote a song for somebody else, but then they came and played the song they wrote. Was that the vibe?
Yeah, that was actually like slightly before my time. But it was something that, yeah. But I definitely went to a few of those nights or something that like Mark and Ben were like super proud of putting together. But yeah, it was basically like ghost writers, that would come and play their songs live at the Spare Room, which is really cool.
That was really cool. What now for you, like what was that first concert you went to where you're like, that was friggin' awesome? Like the
my God, my first concert was that. Like my first concert, I mean, I guess that I consider my first concert was No Doubt, Garbage, and the Distillers, which is like so couldn't be more perfect. I think I must have been like 13, I think 13, maybe 14. I like
sneak out of the house, go to a show.
What's up?
Do you have permission, or is that like sneak out of the house and go?
I think I had permission for that one, but there was a lot of sneak out of the house kind of vibes around that time frame. But I bought like a No Doubt bomber jacket and didn't take it off for like 3 weeks, for like maybe 3 months. And it was just such an epic first show. And I knew who Garbage was, but I wasn't familiar with the Distillers. And I still listen to the Distillers now. It's so that was a big moment for me. Teenage Yarly.
Did you ever have like, because we live in LA, a moment where someone that you like worship came into one of your bars?
Marilyn Manson, even though he's canceled now. That was a moment for me when Marilyn Manson was at Spare Room for Billy Corgan's birthday. That was both of those, especially in one room, was really crazy. When we had gosh, what am I thinking of? When Dave Grohl played the room at Genghis, that was pretty
He did?
spectacular.
Crazy. That room was tiny.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like there's some like we try not to speak too much about like the celebrities that like come through our doors. It's just kind of like not our thing. So I like kind of block it, like not block it out, but never like make too big a deal out of it. And I feel like I've been oh, you know what, Theophilus London playing the actual dining room at Genghis randomly like one night was just kind of mind-blowing for me. That was November of not last year but the year before. We had just done a huge charity event for Baby to Baby, and I like was walking in, you know, dropping off Cambros of like liquid, and Theophilus London is playing the corner booth, you know, and just people are fucking partying. This was like kind of right before we got shut down,
Right.
like the November.
It's a good way to go out.
Yeah, it really was. It really was. And we had just done this charity gala, and like Mark and Med were in the restaurant, like still in their tuxes. Like Mark was drinking a White Claw, like listening to Theophilus London. I was like, this is really the greatest day of my life.
That's awesome. And by the way, I think it's, yeah, I agree. Like when shit's happening at your bar, you're not supposed to be texting your friends and paparazzi. But months or years later, I think you're allowed to celebrate the fact that that was a cool moment.
Totally. Yeah. I feel like I've been really blessed to have a lot of those really insane kind of opportunities. Especially, I'm more of a fan of like if you were to ask me like what my favorite, you know, Nine Inch Nails tracks are, it's definitely going to be more like B-sides. Like I'm definitely more of a B-sides gal. I really don't like the songs that you hear over and over and over again. So my like the kind of like awe-inspiring like musical experiences I have are going to be like slightly more underground. Not to be like pretentious in any way, but that's more like, you know, of my speed. Like definitely that night with Theophilus London was just, you know, kind of like the pinnacle of that kind of experience, even more so than, you know, something like, you know, like seeing Marilyn Manson, you know, or Billy Corgan perform.
Right. That's awesome. Well, you know, seeing all that stuff and seeing people perform, it always goes good with a drink. I know you have a drink to make for us. So what do you have going on here today?
So I couldn't like not make a Jack Daniel's cocktail talking to you, you know, obviously I have to do that. But no, I wanted to make a drink that was inspired by breakfast because I wake up really late and sometimes you need a drink. And I wanted to make something that people could, you know, kind of utilize. At least some of the ingredients are kind of common and you could easily get at home. So this one's called Breakfast in Bed for 400,000. I know you're talking to somebody special right after this. That's
awesome.
I love like a shandy in the morning. And I think that that's like the most like rad example of what I would want for breakfast in bed, besides maybe a couple other things. But so we got Jack Daniel's. We're using Campari, apricot preserves. I actually don't have apricot today. I have strawberry. But what's really rad about this drink is you can use literally whatever kind of like jam or preserves you have in your kitchen. Apple, blueberry, whatever works. Cinnamon, lemon, and gonna top it with Hefeweizen. So nice. The only thing that you would really like need to like make at home, you know, is a cinnamon syrup, which you can just make by like steeping cinnamon sticks in water and boiling it, adding equal parts, you know, the water to the sugar, and letting it sit overnight, strain the cinnamon sticks out, and then you have really nice cinnamon syrup. And I put that on my waffles in the morning, so have fun with that.
Good work.
But yeah, so sweet. So we'll make a drink. So we've got Jack. I don't even really remember how to bartend anymore. P.S.
That's right. It's been a while.
This is actually a vintage bottle of Campari, believe it or not. Like the one
Circa
thing I
what year?
Drunk in my house yet.
So like vintage or like 5 years old?
No. Like super. I actually found this years and years ago when Ryan Fitzgerald was visiting LA. Of course, he like took me like like to like all these old liquor stores. And we found this bottle of Campari. Whoa, that smells crazy. But yeah, super old bottle.
Nice.
Like 5 years vintage. A little splash of cinnamon. I'm kind of a one-trick pony with cinnamon. I use it in most everything. But the idea here was I really love apricot and Campari together, and I really love strawberry and Campari together. So I was thinking about that either of those preserves would taste really nice with cinnamon.
Nice.
A little bit of lemon juice, fresh lemon juice, ideally. So you can use a Collins glass or any kind of like large glass, like ideally like 10 to 12 ounces, maybe like 12 ounces, I think is best. You're going to shake it up. Just like a short shake is good, because we're going to add Hefeweizen on top of it.
Gotcha.
I like to add the Hefeweizen like right to the shaker tin, so I don't have to then stir it in the glass.
Right. Nice. Good work.
Can you see me?
I can see. Yeah, now we can. Yeah, okay, awesome. Sweet.
And you garnish it with like whatever fresh fruit you have available. You know, if you use apple preserves, you can use fresh apples. If you use strawberry, you can do fresh strawberry. I'm going to plop some raspberries in here because why not? Boom. Boom.
Awesome. Beautiful. Nice. That looks delicious. Cheers to you.
Cheers to you. What are you drinking?
Jack. Cheers.
Ooh la la. Yum.
Delicious. Yeah, well, I appreciate it. That's awesome. And we have that we had that recipe up so people could make it along with you. And yeah, look, thank you I wish I could see you in person. It's been really like over a year. It's too much.
I know, it's pretty stupid, huh?
Yeah. So, but hopefully soon I'll see you here or in Nashville where you spend some time these days.
Yeah, maybe let's plan to maybe overlap there. That would be super cool.
Awesome. That'd be great. Very cool. Well, I'm thrilled that you came on and good talking to you. And thank you very much.
Miss you, buddy. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
All right. Welcome, Henry. You know,
peace.
Probably one of the favorite people I've met in the past couple of years. So thank you for doing this.
Sure thing. Thanks, E.T.
You know, I mentioned before the show how we met, but, you know, when you say Henry Diltz, everyone thinks of your photography, which they should, but that's not how you started your career, correct? You didn't start as a photographer.
No, I mean, I started, my career, you call it that, as a musician, you know, but that was the middle of my life. I mean, I'd already been to 3 different colleges, you know, studying psychology. I mean, I'd lived all over the world as a little boy when my dad was in the State Department. I grew up for 5 years in Tokyo, Japan, from 48 to 52. And then I lived in Bangkok, Thailand in 54 and 55. And then I lived in Germany and started going to college in Munich, Germany. You know, and then I went to West Point for a year, was a West Point cadet, which was lovely and fun. And I'm so glad I went and I'm so glad I left, you know. It was a great year and I learned all about it. It was my military karma, you know, but I was destined to play the banjo, you know. So I left there and went to University of Hawaii to study psychology, which was my major, and play the banjo. And I went into this little coffee house in downtown Honolulu, and I met Cyrus Faryar, the proprietor of the Green Sleeves Coffee House. And we became really best friends. And every night I was in his coffee house, playing, singing folk songs. And pretty soon we formed a group, which became the Modern Folk Quartet, which is that record album over your shoulder.
Yeah.
Our first record album.
Right. Now, I didn't know that. I didn't know you started that in Hawaii.
Yeah.
And
for a couple of years there, as we weren't called the Modern Folk Quartet then, we were called the Lexington 3 and then the Lexington 4. And then we became the Modern Folk Quartet shortly before we moved to California.
And did you move to LA at first?
Yeah. Yeah.
What prompted that move? Was it like work opportunity or just that was the scene?
Well, we played in the end, we played in a steakhouse for about a year. We play there almost every night. And we got pretty tight in our 4-part harmony. But no one had heard of us. We didn't have a record. I mean, we're just in the islands there, and we thought that California, where the folk boom was happening, was where we ought to be to see what we could do. And the first thing we did was play the Troubadour. About the second night we were in LA, we played the Troubadour Hoot Nanny night, like open mic night.
Right.
And we got up on stage and we started singing this one song, The Ox Driver. And the thing was, no one had seen us. I mean, in LA, you see these groups coming up, you see them early on, you see them get better, but no one had ever heard of us. And so we were pretty tight when we hit that stage and we started singing The Ox Driver. And when we got to the the chorus, which was a big 4-part thing, suddenly we burst into this 4-part harmony and the whole audience stood up clapping. And it was like, whoa, what's going on? It was really weird because we did really have some really startling, bright, strong harmonies. And no one had heard that. There were a lot of trios and duos, but not a lot of quartets, singing quartets, So that's, and then we got a manager and an agent, and Warner Brothers signed us, and we started touring across the country for about 4 or 5 years. We did that.
What any notable or highlights that you remember playing certain venues or festivals?
Gosh, well, we played a lot of folk clubs all across the country. And in those days, you always played a week or 6 days, always. I mean, nowadays, a group plays one night usually, or unless you're the house band, like the Doors
Right.
at the Whiskey or something. But whenever you get booked into a club, it was always for 6 days, which was really nice because we were there long enough to make friends, with people, waitresses, and then we would do a lot of TV shows, just, Shindig and the Lloyd Thaxton Show and On Broadway Tonight. I mean, they're shows we don't have now, but, then we did college concerts because colleges all had folk music concerts, usually in the afternoons, but it'd be a whole audience, full of, and we'd be out in the parking lot, having a little toke of God's herb, and then we'd run up there on stage and I'd run to the edge of the stage and just go, wow, look at all you people, and wow. And then we'd burst into song. Like the Kingston Trio used to come barreling out on stage, and burst into song. That was so much fun doing that. Gosh. I know we played the Village Gate in New York a bunch of times, which was a jazz club. And folk and jazz went together, and folk and comedy went together. Especially, we wore suits and we sang sophisticated folk music. I mean, it was 4-part harmony, so it went along with jazz. And we opened for many people there at the Village Gate. Those were memorable times. And then in L.A. in '65, when we were folk rock, after the Beatles, we went electric, like all the folk groups, got a drummer, and we played a place called The Trip, probably 6 or 8 times on Sunset Strip. I remember us opening for the Four Tops. I remember us opening for Donovan. we opened for the Velvet Underground, and Andy Warhol was there showing 16 millimeter movies, you know, behind the group.
Right.
We were just there so much. It was like home, and always a week at a time, you know. And then the Troubadour, that was our home base. We played the Troubadour many times, sometimes 2 weeks in a row. And that would be, you know, 6 nights a week. So
that's pretty epic, considering that, you know, how we view the Troubadour now and the history of who's played there, that you played there so often, so early in your career. I mean, your first show in LA, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it really, you know, Troubadour's changed a little bit now. It's gone through changes. In the folk days, it was kind of a sophisticated place. It had tables, and you could order the fruit and cheese plate, you know, or a hamburger. They had waitresses, and you know, you could order stuff at your table. Now it's just a big room where people stand in front of the stage, and the kitchen is now the bar. So, you know. But you could go down there any night in the 60s and 70s and see all of your friends. And, all, you know, Linda Ronstadt, David Crosby, Jim McGuinn, Roger McGuinn, you know, what, Harry Dean Stanton was always there, Doug Dillard, the banjo player. Always, those people would always be in the bar. You know, it was really a home away from home.
So, you know, so your band, I don't think I've ever really met anyone that's not maybe as obsessed with this as I am, but your band basically saved Stairway to Heaven from a lawsuit, right? That true or false?
That is true. Yeah, that is true.
So, yeah. So for anyone that doesn't know, there was a band that, the estate of the guy who wrote a song in the late 60s was suing Led Zeppelin because their song in the beginning of Stairway to Heaven have a similar melody. And, you know, obviously there's millions and millions of dollars at stake because Stairway to Heaven is such a huge hit. And the lawsuit was settled because of your band. Now, can you tell how that happened?
Yeah, because, well, we had 2 arrangers in the band. Jerry Yester was one who'd been in the Association and a bunch of different groups, and Chip Douglas was the other arranger. But Jerry had arranged this old kind of children's folk song called "To Catch a Shad," or Jackfish, we called it for short, because it says Jackfish in it. But it had a certain melodic introduction, you know, a chord progression. And that just came along with the song, and we recorded it on I believe, that album, Over Your Shoulder. Yeah. So that, and then that same chord progression was what was in the Led Zeppelin song, Stairway to Heaven. So long before that guy wrote the song, we had done that same melody in the intro, same chord, you know.
So did they bring your song into court, or did you actually have to go in and...
No, I didn't go. I didn't go. I wasn't really involved in it. I knew that our song had something to do with it. I mean, I heard about it and read about it, but no, I didn't go to court.
Well, look, I mean, I'm sure people want to hear how similar this really is to Stairway, so let's give it a whirl. To the modern, you know, the modern folk quartets, To Catch a Shad.
That old jackfish swimming up the stream asked that jackfish what did he mean. Baited my hook to catch a shad. The first thing he bit was my old dad.
All right, so it's pretty undeniable that riff sounds a lot like the beginning of Stairway to Heaven and a lot like the Spirit song. So it's, you know, and I've heard Jimmy Page say the same thing. It's an old folk kid song that's been around for hundreds of years, and it's been recorded thousands of times. So I don't know that anyone can claim ownership of that riff. And I think the judge said the same thing, right? They threw it out.
It's short, you know, but that's it.
And then, your song goes a whole different way. The Spirit song goes a whole different way. Stairway goes a whole different way. It's just using that little,
only that little
melody.
intro.
Yeah.
Right. Chord progression. Yeah.
Yeah. So, hey,
Well,
I mean, look, not that you needed more legendary status, but you saved Stairway. You can wear a shirt that says "I saved Stairway."
Right. Okay.
Now, I feel like I knew you for years before I knew you because of your photography. The pictures that you took have such a impression on the world of music and just pop culture in general. When you were in your band and you were discovering LA, you lived in Laurel Canyon, right?
Yep.
So you were in Laurel Canyon when Laurel Canyon was Laurel Canyon. You were part of that scene.
Kind of right at the beginning, I mean, all the musicians lived up in Laurel Canyon because it was 5 minutes from Hollywood, 5 minutes from Sunset Strip. You just drive up the hill and you're in the country, and these little cabins up there and these little twisty mountain roads, little windy roads. And everybody found these little cabins up there. There weren't many families up there because the kids need a yard and a sidewalk to play, and they didn't have those up in Laurel Canyon. So actors and musicians ended up there. And long before I picked up a camera, I knew, Stephen Stills and David Crosby and Mama Cass, and all these people were friends of mine. And I actually met a lot of these people on the road. I mean, I met Graham Nash in New York City. I met David, I think, in Florida. We went into some club to see some friend, and David was in the lobby. I met him there. Stephen used to come to our shows. Stephen Stills would come to our shows at the Village Gate in New York City. And that's when I met him. So that was, 3 or 4 years before I ever picked up a camera,
When did you pick up that camera? When did that happen?
In 1966. It was our last tour. We had done a single with Phil Spector. This Could Be the Night. And Rodney Bingenheimer played it. It was his theme song for his weekly radio show.
I didn't know that.
Spector, we were waiting for him to release it so we could become famous, but he never released it. We were a folk rock experiment. And Spector was very paranoid at that point. He would, he made records that he never released because if he wasn't positive it was going to go to #1, then he didn't want to put it out. So ours didn't come out till years later. And so we did one last tour across the country that had been already booked. And it was on that tour in Michigan that we stopped in a little secondhand store one day, and I picked up a camera. The guy in front of me, my friend Cyrus, said, "Oh, okay." There was a table full of used cameras right inside the door. He said, "Oh, a camera. I'll have one." And I was behind him. I said, "Yeah, what the heck? Why not?" And I grabbed one, $20, We were in there just to spend a little mad money on stuff we didn't need,
Right.
And that's how that happened, totally by accident. And then we started photographing each other for a few weeks on the road, developed the film, and it was slide film, so we had a slideshow. And that's when it really got me, when I saw that first picture hit the wall, my hands, you can't see all my hands here. 8 feet wide. I mean, glowing in color. And all of our hippie friends were there in the room, and we could relive our adventures on the road and talk about it and laugh about it. And God, it was just amazing to me. I thought, this is absolute magic that you could save these moments, and then look at them later in a really neat situation with friends and talk about it. And I just thought, I'm going to take more of these things so we can have more of these great evening get-togethers. And that's kind of how it started.
When did it go from, you recounting the stories of what you did to your friends saying, "Hey, take my picture"?
One day in Laurel Canyon, I was walking down the road and I heard this guitar music coming out of a little house that I didn't really know. And I walked up to the door and it was Stephen Stills sitting in there at a friend's house playing the guitar on the couch. And I knocked on the door. And as I said, I'd met him a couple years earlier, 4 years earlier in New York City. So I knew Stephen, and I knocked on the door and said, "Hey, come on in." It was a guy. And Stephen said, "Hey, we're going down to Redondo Beach this afternoon, the Buffalo Springfield, he meant, to do a sound check. You want to come along? Because he knew I took pictures. I don't know if he even cared. We were just friends, you know. I said, yeah, I'd love to come along. Because I wanted, while they were doing the sound check in the club in the afternoon, I went down to the beach and photographed people that I could put on my slideshow. You know, and I got a picture of a guy with a monkey on his shoulder. And their faces looked very similar. So it was a great, I loved that shot. It was a big hit at the weekly slideshow, you know. But then I walked back to the club, and there was a big mural on the wall of a guy riding a bicycle and, you know, lots of colors. And I was just framing that up because I like colorful things. Because in a slideshow, the next slide comes, boom, bang, on the wall. And then the next one, boom, on the wall. And there's a reaction. Wow, you know, I love that, you know, when people would, you know, react to it. So this was a huge, colorful mural, and I was just framing it up and photographing it, and the little back door of the club opened, and the Buffalo Springfield walked out. And I said, hey, you guys, would you just stand right there next to that wall underneath that mural so I can show how big it is? And really, that's all I was thinking, you know, and they stood there, and I took a roll of film, and they started, you know, acting and making faces and doing funny things. And so I just kept taking pictures, you know. And that was my first really big sort of accidental group shot. And a few days later, Teen Magazine called me. I think it was called Teen Set. They said, we hear you have a picture of the Buffalo Springfield. We'd like to run it in our magazine, and we'll pay you $100, you know. And I went, whoa, really? You know, this is my hobby. Someone's going to pay me for doing what I'm doing all day long anyway. So that was a kind of an epiphany. The first epiphany was when that first slide hit the wall. The second epiphany was when somebody said, we want to pay you to use your picture. And that all happened in 66.
Very cool. That's amazing. You know, it's very rare, you know, that people say, do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life. I feel like you are one of those people that actually live that mantra. You know, because I've seen you telling the stories of all the stuff you've done, and it's obvious you love it. It didn't seem like work. At least you do a good job of making it seem like it was all fun. And that, you know, in Laurel Canyon, you know, we'll start looking at some pictures. I'm sure people watching are wanting to see what all the magic was. You know, so Laurel Canyon back then, you had the Mamas and the Papas, and Mama Cass, you have that great picture of her. You know, if we can bring, that's amazing. How did that come about?
That was in 68. I had a partner, Gary Burden, who was an art director. And
did all the album covers, right?
Yeah, we did. Actually, you know, it started with Mama Cass because he was an architect. Just gotten out of the Marines. He'd been in Korea earlier, and then he became an architect. And he was remodeling part of Mama Cass's house, and they got to be buddies, you know, probably smoking buddies. You know, that's what made the 60s, you know, and made all that music, really. Everybody would have a little toke of God's herb, you know, and it made the day so much more exciting, so nice, so much nicer, you know. And so they got to talking, and she really liked him. He was a very likable guy. She said, you know what, Gary, I want you to do my album cover. I'm doing my first solo album, and I'd love for you to design it. And he said, well, Cass, I'm an architect, you know, I'm not a graphic artist. And she said, well, you do a blueprint, you do an album cover, what's the difference? You know? So he said, yeah, you're right. Okay. And then he happened to bump into me at a park on a Sunday afternoon. We had a Love-Ins, where it's called a Love-In. You go to the park and spend Sunday afternoon with all your hippie friends all dressed up, you know, playing music and having fun. And he saw me there taking pictures, and he said, hey, you're a photographer. We want to help me. I've got to do this album cover of Mama Cass. And I said, sure, because I knew Mama Cass really well. You know, we played on shows with the Mamas and Papas, television shows and stuff. And I think we did a big show at the Hollywood Bowl, a big folk show one time with us and the Mamas and Papas. And Pete Seeger and Sonny and Cher and all that.
It's a hell of a show.
So I did that first album cover, and then we went on from there. Between Gary and I, we knew everybody. You know, we knew Crosby, Stills, and Nash, and we knew Joni Mitchell, and we knew Mama Cass, and all those people. So we became a team for doing these album covers. Yeah.
The another, I mean, that's pretty awesome, because I know you and Terry Reid were good friends with him, right? There's the three, right? You guys were all really close.
Yeah, he was a real good friend of Gary's, and then therefore a friend of mine. I first photographed Terry Reid in 1968 at the Miami Pop Festival. And he was this like 19-year-old boy wonder, you know, on the guitar that we'd heard about, you know, who had been offered, you know, Robert Plant's role, right, in Led Zeppelin, but he turned it down. You know, he had his own thing going.
It's it was a lot, you know. It's Terry's going to be on the show, so we'll get him to talk about some of that legend of Terry. And I know he was in the Canyon for a minute too, right? He was there with you guys for a little while.
There for a while, yeah. And then in later
Joni
years,
Mitchell, was Joni Mitchell like the queen of the Canyon?
Well, you know, I mean, she was one of the best songwriters that came out of the Canyon. She lived on Lookout Mountain Avenue, right down at the bottom near Laurel Canyon Boulevard, right near Frank Zappa's cabin. It used to be Tom Mix's cabin right on the corner. And then Frank Zappa lived there, and she lived next to him. And so I lived further up the hill of Lookout Mountain. So I drive by her house every day, a couple times a day, going up and down, up and down. And she was, you know, the thing that happened in the 60s, in the middle 60s, when the Beatles played Ed Sullivan, all the folk groups saw that. Now, what folk groups played folk songs. You didn't write folk songs. They were 100 years old, you know, sailors, miners, cowboys, you know. But when the Beatles played Ed Sullivan, they played some of their original songs. Now, the Beatles originally sang Blue Suede Shoes and Roll Over Beethoven and Long Tall Sally. They didn't write their own music. And then they started writing their own, you know, She Loves You, yeah, yeah, yeah. We saw that on TV and said, wow, we need to get electric instruments. We had a stand-up bass, you know. We went out the next week and got an electric bass, electric guitars, eventually got a drummer. Everyone wanted to make that new kind of happy music. And people started writing their own songs, which is a huge difference in the music industry. Because up until then, you were either singing these old folk songs, or there was the Brill Building that had the writers in it, you know. There were famous writing teams going back to the 50s, 40s, 30s. And then there were the singers. You know, Frank Sinatra never wrote a song. Elvis Presley never wrote a song. You had these people who wrote songs, and then the singers would sing them. But so this was a brand new thing, really, to have a whole bunch of people writing their own feelings, their own thoughts, you know, their own poetry, their own ideas about life, and singing it themselves. That was a whole new ballgame, and that's what happened in Laurel Canyon, and New York, you know, other cities as well. But I put it down to the Beatles' influence and Bob Dylan, who was a folk singer, and then he wrote a song for Woody Guthrie. He wrote a talking blues a la Woody Guthrie. And then that was his kind of, I guess, one of his first songs that he wrote, and became very popular, very popular. Right. And the whole idea of peace and love and brotherhood and all that was in the air, you know, so.
It is pretty amazing, though, that it all converged in Laurel Canyon. I feel like for some reason this past year, there's been, or maybe 3 years, there's been a lot of attention given to Laurel Canyon. And it's pretty amazing that you see all that talent. I mean, you have that great picture with Joni Mitchell and, you know, Crosby and Eric Clapton, which is just a crazy picture.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a picnic at Mama Cass's house. You know, Mama Cass was the Gertrude Stein of Laurel Canyon. Gertrude Stein, you know, in Paris in the 20s and 30s would meet all these artists and writers, and she'd have them all over to her house in the afternoon and have a salon, you know, where they all met each other and shared, you know, visions. And Mama Cass was that way. And she was, because the mamas and papas were always on these TV shows with English groups, just over to America for the first time. And she met Eric Clapton with Cream, and he was very quiet, kind of shy. And she said, well, you don't know anyone in town. Why don't you come on up to my house tomorrow afternoon? We'll have a little picnic in the backyard. I'll invite some friends. There was about 10 people there. Other friends of hers, my partner Gary was there with his wife and little child. Mickey Dolenz was there. A bunch of people were there. And she invited David Crosby, and he brought along his new protege, Joni Mitchell. They were in the middle of recording her first album. And we sat there on the lawn under the trees, and she played her entire first album. You couldn't, wow. No one had heard it, right? And you can see the way she has her finger right across the fretboard. She didn't play regular chords. She just tuned to a chord and laid her finger flat across the fretboard. And Eric Clapton had never seen that before. He was mesmerized by this beautiful song and this beautiful guitar playing, very melodious, the way she plays, tuning it to a chord. So yeah, he sat there for an hour, staring at her. That was great.
Right. He was already pretty much Eric Clapton, at that point.
Heck yeah. The famous.
That's pretty amazing. That's what's so cool about what you do. Mm-hmm. You capture these moments in time where in most people's lives, they tell the story, but it's not quite the same because you're creating the image in your head, right? Like reading a book, which is also great. But when you can actually see it, when you're talking about it and you can tell the story and what the scene was like, it's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. To have pictures to illustrate, your memories and yeah, like what do they call it? Like in class when you have a visual aid, you can hold up a map, something, So yeah, it's fun that it happened that way. I always say, hey, all those pictures I really took for myself. I mean, some of them they said, oh, we need a picture for this or that, and I took it, but a lot of them, like that picnic shot. I mean, that wasn't a job, that wasn't. I was just there, to have a picnic and be with my pals and friends and and I was always taking pictures wherever I was of whatever was going on, somebody's dog or cat, baby or truck or car out in the street, whatever I saw, I took a picture of it. And very often I saw other musicians,
Right. Well, you have a great picture of Neil Young that I had never seen before with his dog. I'm assuming it's his dog.
It is. It's his dog, a puppy. His name was Harte, Harte, named after the Western short story writer, Bret Harte. Okay. So this was Little Harte, one of the farm dogs. And that's Neil's farm, Broken Arrow Ranch up in Northern California, near Half Moon Bay in Redwood City. And he owned the whole valley. And that's his cattle on the hillside behind there, Black Angus cattle. He had lots of cows, lots of animals. He had llamas and emus and geese, and dogs. And he had buffalo for a while. That hillside had a herd of buffalo on it, but they got some kind of disease that always cattle all over the valley. Yeah. And we were walking around the farm. Gary Burden and I would go up there and spend a couple days and just talk and hang out and shoot photos. And we were walking around the farm one morning, and we went into a little barn to look at a guitar that Neil had in there. And when I turned around, I saw him standing outside. He was looking at something down the road and just took that, once again, just happened. It wasn't a posed or a planned shot. It wasn't a photo gig, really.
Right.
Yeah.
But I mean, look, it just seems to happen a lot to you, right? Where so there's a lot to be said about you having a good eye for what to take pictures of versus things just happening.
Yeah. Musicians hang out together, being a musician is like being in a club. And when you meet other musicians, you're kind of instantly friends. I mean, you all belong to that club, and musicians, they hang out a lot, right? They don't have a day job, If
Right.
anything, they work in the evening for a couple hours, right? But they have their whole day, so we'd always hang out in Laurel Canyon, or go down to Sunset Strip for lunch, or whatever. Go to Mama Cass's house and hang out by the swimming pool, or whatever it was. Go to the park or a Love Inn. Always hanging out with all your buddies and friends, and I'm just glad that I picked up the Framing Jones, to look
Right.
at everything. Yeah.
Well, the one thing that you captured, which it's amazing the influence this event had, was Woodstock, right? You were the official Woodstock photographer.
I was.
That
I got
picture-
hired by the producer Michael Lang after my dear old friend Chip Monk, who had been lighting guy on many of our folk shows, in the early '60s, and he was the lighting guy at Woodstock. And he called me one day and he said, I was in my kitchen in Laurel Canyon. He was in New York. He said, "Henry, we're going to have a huge concert out here in a few weeks. You ought to be out here, And I said, "Well, Chip, how do I get a photo pass? I don't know any of those people. I've read about it, And he said, "I'll talk to the producer." And then next day, Michael Lang called me and said, "Chip says we need you. I'm sending you a ticket and $500." And I flew out, and I spent 2-3 weeks, I think, watching them build the new stage and all that. That was really fun. In fact, it was 3 weeks like being at summer camp, I mean, all I had to do was walk around and watch the girls making lunch and watch the guys hammering and sawing and building a stage, go to the office and see everyone on the phones. And I mean, I just walked around and had a good time for 3 weeks. And then suddenly there were people sitting out on that hillside, like, what are they doing there? Oh, yeah, I forgot. We're going to have the world's biggest concert. And what we didn't even know until the hillside filled up. And then Saturday morning, someone brought a copy of the New York Times with an aerial photo, because we couldn't see all around. And wow, there was that little stage surrounded by these crowds of people, and all the freeways closed. That was pretty amazing. And here's John Sebastian out at the edge of the stage, singing for the folks there, all by himself. He wasn't on the bill, but they didn't have the next act, hadn't arrived by helicopter. So someone shoved a guitar in his hand and said, "Quick, John, go out there and sing something," which he did. He was on a kind of an acid trip, kind of a little personal, quiet acid trip, So he was plenty high, but he went out there and he sang to that crowd like it was his best friend,
That's amazing, really cool. that is a moment that wasn't even planned for the festival.
Isn't life life is like that, right? Didn't John Lennon say life is what happens to you while you're doing something else, right?
Yeah, basically. Yeah. And it's true. It's true, because
college and then suddenly I was singing folk music, and that wasn't planned. And then I was singing folk music, and suddenly I was taking pictures, and that wasn't planned. So I guess, I think back on it, I think, well, lucky thing that I was a musician, and I didn't have a 9 to 5. I didn't have a routine that I got stuck in,
Right.
So I was able to go with the flow, see what the universe decides is something I like to keep in mind,
And you saw a lot of it. I mean, even after John played, you caught one of the most, iconic images of Woodstock, period, Hendrix. That
Hendrix played Monday morning. Mind blowing. I mean, we've been up for 3 days, a little sleep here and there, but to see them come out at dawn, out on the stage in that early morning light with those bright colors, those bright headbands and stuff, it was like, whoa, and they played a song or two, and then he went into the Star Spangled Banner, which was just so amazing. It's like, wait, what is he playing? He's playing the national anthem. That's the establishment song, that we're peace and love, no wars, and they're go off to, Vietnam and, shoot strangers, right? And I mean, we were, 500,000 people that were against the war and against the government. And he's playing the Star Spangled Banner suddenly in the middle of a hippie music festival. Wow. But then, right away you thought, well, wait, maybe he's reclaiming that, for us. I think that's what he had in mind, It was kind of, that's our song too, we're all, it was a lovely moment. Just a great, never forget it. Yeah. Glad I was standing there.
I mean, you were right there, right? I mean, you were right on the stage, it looked like.
Yeah. Stand on the side of the stage watching. Yeah.
That's crazy.
I had the golden pass, the all access pass, because I was working for the producer. That's one of the tricks, you got to have access to be able to get the photo.
No, that's for sure. I mean, I can't imagine if you just showed up with the camera getting anywhere near that stage, but for you, with the band basically. Now, a huge band that was still together during Woodstock but didn't play Woodstock was the aforementioned Beatles. But you had some time with them, or at least some of the Beatles, right? Did you tell me a story once where you got brought to London to basically meet the Beatles or meet Paul?
I never met him in London. No, I met his wife, Linda Eastman. She was a photographer, and I met her in New York before she ever met Paul. We were photographers. It was in '66, first year I photographed. And I met her at a photo lab, and we got to talking, and we became friends. She'd come to LA, and we'd have lunch. We were fellow photographers. And then I was surprised to read, one day she married Paul McCartney. And then I got a call from her, and she said, Henry, could you come out to Malibu? We need pictures of the two of us. I mean, she was the one that photographed Paul once she married him, but they needed a picture of the two of them together because they'd just done the Ram album together. And so I went out. That's the day right there. I went out and spent the day at this beach house, sitting by the pool, talking, smoking, eating lunch, And then at the end of the day, she said, we need a portrait of the two of us. And I need to see them first thing in the morning because we want to have one for the cover of Life magazine. And so that day was my accidental cover of Life magazine. I mean, she never mentioned that when she said we need photos, but
right. So that was the first time you met Paul at the Malibu house.
Actually, I met him at Shea Stadium with the Love and Spoonful, but I didn't really talk to him. The Love and Spoonful got recognized in the stands, and all the fans were running over, and someone pulled us onto the field and brought us into the dugout and down a hallway and said, quick, go in there. And it was a dressing room, and there was the four Beatles and the four Love and Spoonful and me. And as I went in the door, the guy said, no photos. And that was the Beatles, and Paul was walking around playing his bass unplugged with a harmonica in his mouth, warming up. They were about to go on stage, And I remember John Sebastian went over and talked to John Lennon on one side of the room at a table. Ringo was sitting on the other side of the room all by himself, and I went and sat down and talked to him. I remember saying, hey, Ringo, what do you do with all those stuffed animals the girls throw up on the stage, right? He said, I'll bring them home to me son, Zach. So I'd seen him there, but no, first time I actually met him was there at the beach house in Santa Monica and spent a lovely day there. And then another time they called me to go to the Virgin Islands and spend a week while they were floating on these boats in a bay, Watermelon Bay in the U.S. Virgin Islands, recording the soundtrack to London Town. So I was there for a whole week, watching them play and sing, and we'd have dinners at night and drink beer up on deck, throw each other overboard. Great fun.
Now you and Ringo stayed.
Bunch of musicians,
Did you and Ringo stay tight over the years?
Yeah, I mean, not from that day back in '66, but another time, more like in the '90s, or something, or '80s. I can't remember. It's all a wash. But someone called me and said, "Hey, I'm down here." It was a friend of mine in the music business. He said, "I'm down here at Studio Instrument Rentals in a rehearsal hall, and Ringo is rehearsing his new band, and they need some photos for a tour, program. Could you have any time, to come down this afternoon?" I went right down there. And that's when I really met Ringo. I mean, I'd talked to him that time years before, which he didn't remember, of course. But I remember I said, now, so Ringo, I've got to take, close-ups of the drummer and whatnot. So do you mind if I get up on stage while you're rehearsing and, move around quietly and take photos? He said, look, you're the photographer. I'm the drummer. No, he said, look, I'm the drummer. You're the photographer. It's as simple as that. And I was like, oh, okay, that works for me. And we've been good friends ever since, I mean,
That's
I've
really
photographed
cool.
him many, many, many times. I'll get a call, Ringo needs a new photo, and I go up to his house. And I know he likes it because I don't bring anybody with me. I don't bring any assistants, I don't bring lights and equipment. I just come with my camera, a little camera bag, and it's just the two of us, and we're musicians again, It's
Right.
easy to talk about stuff, There's road stories. I mean, we all know, we have people in common, and there's a certain energy, a certain valence, that musicians live on a certain level, and that's why that's why it works, I think I'm not obtrusive. If I'd have gone to photo school and become a photographer and learn how, get in there and get the picture. Okay, you stand here and we're going to set the lights up, and then you've ruined the moment, right? Now
Right.
you're not. I'm a documentary guy. I like to watch life and see what happens. Also, I happen to be a tiger, my Chinese animal. Everyone should look up their Chinese animal. It's the year you were born. And a tiger likes to hide in the bushes and watch the other animals, or sit up on top of the cliff and look down at the other animals. And that, I like to watch people. I mean, I studied psychology simply because I'm interested in people. I wanted to know, how does all this work? Why are people like they are? God made us all so different. That's fascinating to me.
Right.
Life is fascinating.
No, look, like I said, man, you really found what perfect fit for you. And speaking of being there, one of the most, I guess, cultural phenomenons of a singer is Jim Morrison. And you took one of the most iconic shots of their career, which was the cover, of the Morrison Hotel album.
Yeah.
Which is, such a cool thing to begin with. But then I think you told me about the tie-in to the Hard Rock Cafe, which I had never heard of that from this album cover.
And I look at these things and I think, oh yeah, another accident, another accident, because nobody really envisioned that. I mean, in fact, the Doors called Gary and Gary called me, they said, we want you to, do our album cover. And we went to the office and they didn't have any ideas until Ray Manzarek, the keyboard player, said, my wife and I saw this old hotel the other day in downtown LA. It said Morrison Hotel, and we went, whoa, that sounds great. And we went down there. There it was. We came back a week later with the group. And at first, the guy inside the lobby wasn't going to let us photograph in there, which was the plan somehow. I don't know. We were going to do something inside, but then he wouldn't let us do it. And so we went outside so they could maybe stand in front of that window. And while they were standing there, I noticed the guy leave the desk in the lobby. And I said, quick, run in there, and they ran in. And we took that album cover in 5 minutes. No,
Wow.
They went in there. I mean, nobody said, okay, Jim, you get in the middle, Robbie, you stand up behind him and look over his shoulder. No, nothing. They just went in there, bang. I went click, 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 click. Okay, we got it. And we went out on the sidewalk, and Jim said, let's get a drink, and seemed reasonable. It was about 4:00, and we went a couple of blocks to Skid Row in downtown LA, where it was all bars, and pawn shops. And we were driving along trying to pick a place to stop, and somebody looked out the windshield and said, look, on the next corner, Hard Rock Cafe. Wow, well, that's where we got to go. And as Ray Manzarek said some years later, he said, the Hard Rock Cafe, anything could happen there. You could start a religion or plan a murder. So we we went into the Hard Rock Cafe and had drinks in there. And Jim loved hearing the old winos talk about their lives, because he was a poet. He liked to listen, Right. And we put a picture on the back. Gary, who did the album cover, designed it, put the Morrison Hotel on the front and the Hard Rock Cafe on the back. And when that album came out, they got a call from London, and a voice on the phone said, "Would you mind if we use that name? We're starting a cafe here in London. We'd like to call it the Hard Rock Cafe," and they said, "Sure, go ahead." And then that was the start of the whole empire, of the Hard Rock cafes around the world. And it's funny now, years later, we started a photo gallery and accidentally call it the Morrison Hotel Gallery, simply because we had that picture in the window one day of our gallery in Soho in New York City. And people would stop and look at it. And I said to my partner, that lettering is beautiful on that window. But look above that photo on our window, it's blank. There's nothing. We don't have anything on our window. We had a big window like that. And he said, what a good idea. I'll get a sign painter and we'll put that on our window. Just another accident. We didn't say, I got an idea. Let's use that name for our gallery. No, that didn't happen that way.
I think, man, if they ever made a sequel to Forrest Gump, it should be your story. You just happen to always be in the right place with all these great things happening.
It is funny. I don't know. I think maybe I put it out there early in life that I was really interested in life and people and places and what's going on. And it just, it kind of worked out that way, that I could do that and go with the flow. And
trust me, it worked out. I mean, I think a photo that I love seeing is you on a Learjet with two of the Stones, right? Keith and Ronnie.
Yeah, yes.
Life worked out all right for you, man.
Right. Golly. A friend of mine worked at publicity at Columbia Records, and Michael Jensen. He called me one day and said, "Hey, Henry, we've got this group going out on the road. We need photos of them. Would you go along for a week, on the road and photograph them?" And they're called the New Barbarians. And it was Ron Wood's solo album. And the Stones weren't recording that summer, or touring. So Keith Richards joined the group. And then they had Stanley Clarke, the jazz bass player, and they had Bobby Keys, the sax player, and Ian McLagan, the English keyboard player, and Bunny Modesto was Ziggy Modesto. He was a reggae drummer, friend of Keith's, I guess, and it was a great little band. And I spent a whole week on the airplanes and doing concerts. And when my job was over after the first week, they were going to tour for 2 more weeks. And their manager said, "Well, they know you now, and you're part of the group, so why don't we just hire you for the next 2 weeks?" And so I was 3 weeks, on the road going all over the country with them. And it's funny that their tour manager happened to be a guy named Richard Fernandez, who had been the Eagles tour manager and was a very close friend of mine. And so he was all the time, he would tell people what limo to get in. Okay, Henry, you get in with Woody and Keith, He always would put me in because he knew that's what I needed to take a picture of, And this one day the whole group was going from LA to San Diego, and everybody was going to drive in buses. But Keith and Ron got to go in a little plane, instead of a 3-hour drive, they had a 40-minute flight. Right. And at the last minute, Ron Wood's wife said she wasn't going to go. So Richard said, "Henry, you get in the little plane. You go with them." So that was so great. I mean, I could never thank Richard Fernandez enough. What a cool guy to have that vision. Well, if we're going to get some good pictures out of this, he's got to be with them.
Right.
So I'll be forever thankful to Richard for that.
Well, hey, man, when that plane landed in San Diego, I'm assuming that's where this is from. You took one of the most iconic rock photos of all time, the shot of Keith on the tarmac.
Yes. Actually, that was, I think, St. Louis.
Oh, it wasn't this flight. Gotcha.
No, it was one of the flights in that 3 weeks, though. And see, they have a big airplane, great big passenger jet, but instead of seats, there's bars and couches and stuff, right? And And then when you land on the far side of the field in a big city, all the limos come out and surround the airplane. And we all go down the steps. And Richard Fernandez says, you getting that one, you getting that one, you getting that one. And Keith went over to his limo, and he was waiting for Ronnie to come and get in the limo with him. So he's just standing there with this bottle of Jack Daniels, right? You can see the New Barbarians pass at the back of his little bag there. Oh, yeah. And he's just kind of doing this, right? He just did that. I don't know. I'm always looking. When I see something interesting, I push the button, and I just took that picture, which was what that famous movie, right? Dr.
Evil, yeah.
It's funny. Who's the guy who played Dr. Evil? That Canadian Saturday Night Live guy.
Mike Myers.
Mike Myers. He was in our gallery one time some years ago in New York City in Soho. And he was standing in front of that picture, looking at that picture. And my partner, Peter Blatchley, walked up and said, hey, that was before you made that movie. Maybe is that where you got that from? He said, yeah, I don't,
That is funny. Maybe subliminally got in there and.
Yeah, maybe so. Or maybe
funny.
It's just a natural. I don't know. Do you do that every time you lean back?
I don't think so. I think I've only ever done it to imitate Dr. Evil.
Yeah. Oh, boy.
Look, I couldn't love you enough as a human being. Like, I'm so happy that I got to meet you. We don't even live that far from each other, and got to see you out a lot. So having you come on here and share some of these stories, it's, if no one watches, I'm happy because I got to hang out with you, but hopefully a lot of people get to hear the passion that you have for life and love and all the cool things that you got to do along the way. Just being you, which I think everyone in the world should aspire to have a life like yours and whatever their pursuit is.
Just enjoy life, enjoy what you're doing. I think anybody can turn their life into, life should be an adventure. It should be a fun thing, right? We do have a choice, kind of. We do have
right.
We have karma, we have things we got to do in this lifetime. And, it's all a learning experience, isn't it? It's a learning experience.
No. It hopefully is for most, because, we as humans tend to make a lot of mistakes. So we should hopefully learn from them.
I've said before, but I'll say it again. I read the Indian gurus a lot, to get a little idea of how you could live your life. Read the autobiography of a yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda. That'll change your life. And then in more recent years, Swami Satchidananda, who was the guy at Woodstock in the orange robe who led the morning wake-up exercise. His book called The Golden Present, which has little daily sayings. And he said, look, we're here to learn. We know that. Therefore, we're all students, he says. But you should think of yourself as the only student and everybody else is your teacher. Right. And wow, if you can think about that and keep it in your head, it makes the day very, very interesting. Instead of getting mad, you just say, wait a minute, what can I learn here? Everybody's your teacher. The people that give you the worst time, the hardest time, are even more your teachers because they're teaching you to deal with that. So it's all a matter of just kind of realizing and remembering, what we're here for.
That's awesome. I think that's something that a lot of people forget. They get caught up in so much of the daily grind of life, they forget to enjoy a little bit of it.
They do. I had a spiritual teacher, Betty Walton, in the early 70s. For about a year, I went to see her, and once a week I'd knock on her door, and I was, a hippie, what was I? I was a hippie musician photographer living in Laurel Canyon. I knock on her door in Silver Lake, and she'd open the door, beautiful white-haired old lady with a little white poodle, and she'd say, "How are ya?" And I'd say, "Well, I'm fine, Betty, except my car wouldn't start, and I can't pay the rent, and my girlfriend ran away," whatever it was. And she would always say, "Isn't it great?" And you'd go, Well, after a year of that, it's great, that we can live and have all this shit happen to us. And you know what? You got to say, man, how lucky are we? Isn't it great? Just dig it, get into it, learn from it, keep smiling. It's all good.
Nice. You need to write a book of Henryisms, but, you great outlook. And I appreciate you sharing all that, because I think it's needed, especially right now. We're going through a lot of stuff in the world. You lived through it once already in the 60s into the 70s, and it kind of feels like that world again. So it's good to be reminded that, it is perspective, and it is choice, and it is how you want to live. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, sure. I think it's going to get good in the future. I think it's opening up. We went through a little bit of turmoil for a few years here, but that once again, that's a learning opportunity. We learned to think about what it means to be, an American. What it means to have democracy. How do we feel about that? Well, we're all, and half of us feel one way and half feel another way. But we're learning, because it's the age of Aquarius now, the beginning of it, and we're gonna have a higher frequency. We're gonna know more. We're gonna relax and get into it better. I think that's coming up. So we've had a few dinners. We'll have to. I can't wait till we can have dinner again.
I know that'll be great. And I do look forward to that. So again, thank you so much for sharing your story, what the photos that you've taken, and all that goes with it, and the philosophy that basically makes you who you are. So thank you, man.
Sure, E.T. Happy to spend this time with you.
Awesome. All right, we'll see you soon, Henry. Thank you.
Peace and love, as Ringo says. He goes like this: peace and love. Have a good day. Okay, bye.
Take care. Thanks for tuning in to Rock on the Rocks. Be well, be kind, rock on.